What if I told you that Andor Season 2 is a masterpiece, not just for the story, but for the hidden details that creator Tony Gilroy carefully put into every episode? For instance, the theme of unification and division we see in this season with the Chandrilan wedding, Ghorman front, and rebel leaders fighting amongst themselves on Yavin 4, representing how rebellions must come together to have any chance of succeeding. Or how the rebels wear warm colors like orange, red, and yellow, while the Empire wears cold whites and blues. And how Mon Mothma sheds her blue cloak after her legendary speech, and Andor replaces it with an orange one, saying, "Welcome to the Rebellion." These touches are deliberately placed by the filmmakers, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you notice them, you can't help but wonder, why? What are the filmmakers trying to say with these touches? There's countless details present in Andor Season 2 that really unifies what Andor is trying to say. In this 70-minute analysis, I'll break down each of Andor's 4 arcs in Season 2, showing you how hidden themes are introduced and developed over 8 hours and 22 minutes of runtime. I've also timestamped this video if you want to navigate to a particular arc. Without further ado, let's jump into analyzing Arc 1, the Chandrilan Wedding. What's fascinating about this arc are the countless examples of unification and division we see. For example, the Chandrilan Wedding. This whole arc is based around this event, this union of two young people in marriage. And while some may think it's boring, it's actually a perfect plot point to base this arc around, given what the Andor creators are trying to say about rebellion. There's many other examples of unification and division in these episodes, like how Andor gets captured by a band of rebels in Episode 1, and then they start fighting amongst themselves, splitting up into 2 factions in the jungle. The place where Krennic, Partagaz, Dedra, and other Empire officials meet to discuss Ghorman is called the Maltine Divide. Bix, Willman, and Brasso are immigrants on Mina Rau, trying to fit in or unify with the people there. Dedra and Edie meet for the first time in Episode 3, and while the gathering is initially contentious, they come to an agreement that transforms Edie into a totally different person around Cyril. And then we have Mon. Poor Mon. Most of the interactions she has in this arc are divisive. First, she's at odds with Tay, who blames her and the rebels for his investments souring. Then she's at odds with Luthen, who's upset with Mon for bringing Tay into the circle in the first place. Then she's at odds with her own daughter, who basically hates her at this point. Speaking of Lita, she has a fight with her future husband on the first day of the wedding activities too. And speaking of Tay, his wife left him, which is another reason he spirals out of control. Dedra talks about how her parents were criminals, and how she grew up in an Imperial Kinderblock. And Edie talks about how Cyril's dad abandoned them when Cyril was young. Mon's assistant Erskine talks about how his father had an affair with a Ghorman and how he was raised on Naboo, and how much of a big scandal it was. These details perfectly highlight something that Andor creators are trying to say about rebellion, and that is, it's extremely hard to work together in a rebellion. Rebellion by its very nature is chaos, like we've established in other videos, and rebel leaders do need to have order and discipline to accomplish anything. I'll be honest, I didn't enjoy the plotline of Andor getting captured by rebels who were too busy fighting to work together, but I understand the greater point Tony Gilroy was trying to make about how difficult it is to work together in a movement that's chaotic by its very nature. Spoiler alert for Season 2, but we see this all throughout the season, whether it's the Ghormans disagreeing about how to handle the Empire, or rebel leaders in the final episodes who disagree about whether to trust intel from Luthen about the Death Star. In Episode 1, Cassian tells the rebels on Yavin that he stole this TIE fighter for the rebellion, and one of them answers,
"Stolen for who?"
For the rebellion.
Whose rebellion?
Last season, we listened to Saw Gerrera be apprehensive to work with anyone who didn't share his exact ideals.
We need to pull together, Saw.
Krieger's a separatist. Maipe's a neo-Republican. The Ghorman Front, the Partisan Alliance, sectorists, human cultists, galaxy petitionists. They're lost. All of them lost.
The irony is that rebellions, which are born from chaos, need to come together to have any chance of succeeding. And the examples of division and unification in this arc showcase this point perfectly. It's here that I want to introduce a second major theme in this arc that ties directly into unification and division, which, if you've watched my other Andor videos, you know is a recurring motif already, and that's one of circles. When Castian talks with Naya, he expresses joy at being with her as she steps into the circle of the rebellion, saying,
This makes it worth it. Being with you, being here at the moment you step into the circle.
When Krennic briefs Empire officials at the Maltine Divide, he says that
the group in this room is of this moment the tightest of closed circles.
when we catch up with Mon on Chandrila in episode 1, she walks around outside and is surrounded by giant arching stone circles, and as she walks around, the camera does a 360 around her, which gives a sense of her feeling disoriented. If we skip ahead to episode 3, this 360 camera movement continues, particularly when the circular DJ ball comes out. Maybe, on a meaning level, the director used 360 camera movements like this to tie into the circular design choices and circular philosophical messages of Andor. I've mentioned this in other videos, but one of the main messages of Andor is how much history repeats itself. For instance, in episode 2, Mon says to Vel,
"Everything out is new again."
She says this on a pre-wedding hike, one which her and Perrin took years ago when they got married. Mon says it was raining when they had their hike, and now it's sunny. Mon tells Lita about how her mother was drunk when she got married, and how much she hated her for that. Then, in the very moment Lita is about to get married, she finally understands why her mother was drunk. It wasn't because she didn't care, it's because she knew exactly what was happening and tried to hide from the terror of two 15-year-olds about to enter into an arranged marriage. Then Mon gets drunk herself at the end of the wedding. More cycles and circles. As if we needed any more evidence of this motif, as soon as Lita walks out of the room to get married, a circle awaits in the center of the courtyard, which her and her future husband step into to complete the ceremony. An interesting tidbit is that the young couple steps in and moves counterclockwise. Then the four parents step in and move clockwise. I don't know whether this is on purpose, but when you think about Lita's obsession with tradition and the old ways that we see in Season 1, it makes sense that Lita moves counterclockwise, representing the turning back of time and focus on tradition, while Mon and company, who are more wise to the problematic nature of arranged marriages than they let on, move clockwise, representing more progressive or future-facing ideology. It's here we get to one of my favorite elements of this arc, which is the Shandy Merle statue that Davo gifts the new couple. These were stolen from Chandrila 25,000 years ago, and were one of 12 statues that used to stand in a local Chandrilan temple. One of 12 statues, like the 12 hours on a circular clock face. I don't know if this was intentional, but I've seen details like this placed in other films that focus on the passage of time, like Interstellar. In that movie, the ship Cooper pilots to save humanity has 12 chambers that rotate clockwise to create artificial gravity, like a clock. Time is a huge motif in that movie, and I think in the case of Andor, it's more likely than not that the creators made it 12 ancient statues, and not 4 or 8 or 27 for a reason. Symbolically, the Shandy Merle statues tie directly into this circular cyclical theme. These statues, representing Chandrilan tradition, were stolen many years ago and returned back for Lita's wedding. It came full circle. For someone who is so obsessed with Chandrilan tradition, this Shandy Merle statue is a perfect gift for Lita. Another really cool example of this circle motif is actually in the dancing scene. If you pay attention, you'll notice that most, if not everybody, dances in a circular motion on the floor. Mon herself also spins in circles as she's dancing, bless her soul. There's too many circular themes here for it to be random, and we'll see even more of this in future episodes of Season 2. A third motif from this arc that relates to all of this is home. When Andor talks to Naya about being a rebel, he tells her,
You're coming home to yourself.
Lita's wedding happens back home on Chandrila too, and one thing I noticed was how tender Mon and Perrin were being with each other in these episodes, almost like they were reminded of when they got married and were enjoying being home together. Then we have Bix, Brasso, and Willman, who are immigrants on Minoral, separated from their home, history, and a part of themselves. And if you didn't catch it, they hang a photo of Marva right next to their radio, reminding themselves of where they come from. And then we have Erskine, who talks about how even though his father was Chandrillan, he grew up on Naboo because his father had an affair with a Ghorman. He didn't even have a proper home until Mon took him in. And after 25,000 years, the Shandy Merle statue comes back home to Chandrilla. When you think of home as a motif, words like comfort, family, and familiarity come to mind. Familiarity is a great word to use here, and I think that this is yet another sub-theme in this arc. It comes from a Latin word meaning intimacy or friendship, which immediately makes me think of this iconic phrase the Rebels use in Season 2.
I have friends everywhere.
It's funny, there's a lot of spoken references to friendship in this arc. The rebels in the jungle on Yavin 4 tell Andor,
"Your friend was not friendly. He took a shot at us."
Partagaz talks to Dedra about Luthen in Episode 2 and says,
He's here, he's there, he's everywhere, he's nowhere.
it ties into that I have friends everywhere saying so perfectly that I had to mention it. Mon asks Vel about Cinta in Episode 2, saying,
No word from your friend?
when Tay talks to Mon about his investments souring due to rebel activity, he says, I hate having to say all this, Mon, to which she replies,
Oh. To an old friend? After all you've done for me, please.
It's funny, because we get a front row seat to Mon and Tay's friendship breaking at the seams in this arc until he's finally taken out to pasture by Cinta on Luthen's orders. We talked about the word familiar. Well, another connotation of this word is family. It's interesting, because that's exactly what Cassian is trying to do at the very start of Andor. He's trying to find his sister. And intercut throughout Andor's first arc are flashbacks Cassian has to his days as a child on Kenari. He's remembering his history. Then we have Leda and Stekken getting married, officially becoming family themselves. Dedra gets separated from her parents, her family, and is raised in an Imperial Kinderblock. That in and of itself represents what the Empire does so well. They separate you from your own history, making you forget where you come from, essentially wiping your slate completely clean. Nemik says that,
There's a growing list of things we've known and forgotten, things they've pushed us to forget. Things like freedom.
I detailed in my Aldani video this theme of history and how much the Empire pushes you to forget your history. It's super relevant to bring it up again right here in this arc that seems so focused on home, family, history, and familiarity. Cyril, like Dedra, has a father who abandoned his mother. Interesting how both of these characters turn into key tools for the Empire in their quest for superiority. Both characters come from broken homes where connection with their own history has been severed. I was reading Nemik's manifesto while writing the script for this video, and I realized that he begins multiple paragraphs with the word remember. And when we hear him reciting his manifesto in episode 11 of season 1,
Oppression is the mask of fear. Remember that.
it seems like he's gently reminding us of these things rather than shouting them from the rooftops like the rah-rah speech from Independence Day. He's gently asking us to remember, gently nudging us in that direction, because he knows how many common folk have forgotten their own history and rights due to the Empire wiping them out. This was 100% on purpose, I think, and I believe this phrase, I have friends everywhere, that we see in Season 2, and this familiar motif we see in Arc 1, is an interesting evolution of this Andor theme of remembering your history and maintaining that connection with your home, your soul, that the Empire tries to get you to forget. The Empire tries to divide people. It's no mistake that the place Krennic, Partagaz, and Dedra meet is called the Maltine Divide. Here, they talk about ways to influence public opinion and make normal people hate the Gore. In summary, they're meeting at the Maltine Divide to brainstorm ways to stoke the fires of division. It's perfect writing. At the meeting, they say,
with the right ideas, planted in the right markets, in the right sequence, we can now weaponize this galactic opinion.
I don't think it's any mistake that Tony Gilroy and company, in this arc where the Empire schemes to set people against each other, have a whole storyline where Bix, Brasso, and Willman are literal immigrants on another planet that are being hunted down by Empire workers. The Andor creators are winking at us through these scenes and characters, daring us to wake up, giving us the tools to get started, showing us the way. When Andor talks to Naya in episode 1, she tells him that,
Sorry, I was told not to look at you. I didn't see anything.
It's okay.
this is important because Cassian and Naya are not strangers here, not anymore. They are both in the same circle now, seeing how they're both in the rebellion. They are as good as family, which makes what he tells her here so impactful.
This makes it worth it. Being with you, being here at the moment you step into the circle.
I suppose that's another huge theme of Andor. We are all more connected than we think. Division is the tool of an enemy that's desperately trying to maintain power. Keeping us divided is key to maintaining that power, and when we remember that we have way more in common than we think, and that we're all part of the same tapestry, it's fatal to authoritarian regimes. Nemec says this in his manifesto: "There will be times when the struggle seems impossible. I know this already. Alone, unsure, dwarfed by the size of the enemy." In this arc, Andor is alone many times. He's alone in the jungle of Yavin 4. He's alone in space, drifting by himself. And major spoiler alert for the next 10 seconds, but he will be alone at the end of Season 2 as well, when Bix goes to Mina Rao to raise their child. This is the cruel irony of rebellion. You're part of a large group of people who share a common bond that's in some ways thicker than blood, but it seems you must give up your own family or the ones you hold most dear to really commit to the cause. Mon gives up her daughter and family for the rebellion. She gives up her dearest friend, Te Kolma. Her relative Vel must give up her relationship with Cinta for the good of the cause. Joining the rebellion has this weird irony where, yes, you join a family, but you might lose your own in the process. Maybe for protection, and maybe because your family simply can't understand you anymore. Andor himself is an adopted child. He found his second family on Ferrix, and it's his mother and father's rebellious nature that imprinted on him and made him who he is today. The biggest weapon of the Empire is division, and it's ironic that to be a rebel, you also have to separate yourself from the system and decide to fight it. Doing this not only separates you from who you used to be, but also maybe from the people you love and who love you. Because it's you abandoning who you were to create a new identity for yourself. That's hard for many people who love you to accept, but what you do get in return is a family of fellow rebels all united by the cause, like Nemec, Melshi, or Wilman. And the connection you share with these people, united by the cause, can be stronger than blood. Rapid fire motifs. Here's a new segment I'm including in my Andor analysis detailing rapid fire motifs I found interesting, but not quite big enough to do 3 to 4 minutes of analysis on. Ghorman fabric. One thing that I believe ties into these themes of connection and division is Ghorman itself. In episode 1, we watch a 1950s style ad about Ghorman and how they create the best clothing and fabrics in the galaxy. To make fabric, you weave together threads, combining them into something you can wear. Andor creators could have given the Ghor any other kind of economy, but no, they gave them a Parisian-style culture that's heavily focused on weaving together spider silk to create amazing clothing. I think this could definitely be looked at as a motif for the rebellion. A rich tapestry of interconnected threads woven together, representing the necessity to come together as a rebellion to be successful. And spoiler alert for the next 10 seconds, but the Ghorman Massacre seems like this watershed moment that really sets the galaxy on fire and gives a final push to the rebellion, connecting them that much more. I definitely think there's something there, and we'll continue to analyze this in future Season 2 videos. Unlimited power. In this arc, Krennic says that the Emperor's energy initiative is very important to him to get access to
Stable, unlimited power.
It reminded me of Palpatine yelling, "Unlimited power!" in Revenge of the Sith as he electrocutes Mace Windu. Then that made me think of the Narkina 5 jail, which uses electricity to keep people in line. I literally never made that connection that maybe the Narkina 5 complex runs on electricity as a callback to Emperor Palpatine himself, whose most powerful weapon is Force Lightning. I just wanted to note that because I thought it was interesting. Burning. We've talked at length about how Andor has a motif of burning running throughout the show, and that the rebels are positioned as the thing that's burning, while the Empire is cold and calculating. it definitely continues in this arc. Cassian and Naya, for one, wear Empire suits with orange coloring on the top. Mina Rao features lots of red, yellow, and orange colors, both in the architecture and in the yellow wheat that grows there. The building Bix, Willman, and Brasso stay in basically looks like it's one big B-2 droid, and the two Empire-controlled environments we see in this episode are both frozen, dark, and depressing. If you want more insight into this theme, just check out my other Andor videos. There's so many more examples that I highlight at length in other videos. Before we get into analyzing Andor's second arc, consider subscribing to my Substack. I publish the written versions of these essays there, along with movie reviews and thoughts on stuff I'm watching that doesn't make it into my YouTube videos. The name is Filmalysis, and the link is in the description if you want to subscribe. Let's continue with our Andor analysis by breaking down Season 2's second arc, the Ghorman Heist. There's some new concepts we get introduced to here. One of these ideas is propaganda and how it works, which brings me to the Ghorman spiders. For me, they're the perfect starting point for analyzing this espionage arc. These 3 episodes are like a spy movie. Cassian plays a fashion designer visiting Ghorman, Cyril plays a sympathizer to the rebel cause, and Dedra plays an innocent girlfriend giving Cyril an opportunity to show his worth to the Empire. Sitting above all of this is a secret master plan by the Empire to bait Ghormans into open rebellion, a master plan that not even Dedra knows the full details about. When you see all this, it's hard not to compare the Empire's master plan to a spider's web, where characters like Cyril, Rylance, and even Dedra are caught in it. One of my favorite shots from this arc is this one of the camera panning over to a spider spinning webs in a crystal ball. This is shown inside Rylance's office right after Cassian and him make first contact. It's a beautiful image, yes, but it's also a perfect representation of what's going on in this scene, episode, and arc as a whole. Caro Rylance and his followers are unwittingly caught in the web of the Empire. They're doing everything the Empire wants them to do, and showing a spider spinning webs while trapped in a crystal ball is a perfect microcosm of that idea. There's also another meaning behind them that fits perfectly in this arc, and that is how good the Empire is at quote-unquote spinning the news and making people believe whatever they want them to. In episode 4, Lonnie tells Luthen that Dedra is spearheading Ghorman, to which Luthen replies,
Miro. Why, she's a hunter, not a spin doctor.
Spinning. Like the spinning of a web, or the spinning of fibers to form yarn to make clothing. It fits here like a glove. Clothing is an especially delicious motif to chew on in this context, not only because Ghorman is famous for their designer clothing, but also because clothing covers us up, hiding what's beneath. In this arc and show as a whole, where characters have to jump into new skin, take on different names, and hide their true identities for the cause, making the Ghormans one of the most important people in the history of this rebellion, fashion designers, seems intentional. There's other mentions of spiders in this arc that back up what I'm trying to say here. In episode 4, Edie tells Cyril,
I think you've got spiders in your brain.
And in episode 5, Rylance says,
We need to catch them in their lie.
Kind of like a spider catching an insect in its web. One last detail is the candy that Sam puts inside Cyril's Galactopod with information about their secret meeting. I think this heavily connects with our broader discussion about propaganda. It's already been established how much the galaxy hates the Ghor for their supposed arrogance, but once we actually meet them in this arc, we can see they're good people. The filmmakers might have been using the spiders like a representation for the Ghor here. Spiders aren't the most visually appealing creatures, and it's easy to make snap judgments about them because of that. But deep down, beneath the intimidating facade, there's something sweet and beautiful about the Ghormans. It's not a big leap to see a connection between the Empire's scathing propaganda about the Ghormans and the Galactopod's scary appearance. I mean, what does propaganda do at its core? It makes ideas, cultures, and even entire nations seem a lot more dangerous and scary than they actually are. Andor creators representing that idea with the intimidating appearance of a spider seems plausible. There's another motif that ties into this, and that's one of feeding and eating. In episode 4, there's a scene inside the ISB with numerous food-related lines of dialogue. Major Legret talks about a slew of recent arrests his department has made, and after Partagaz presses him for any findings, he says,
We're ingesting the data.
To which Partagaz replies,
We? Who's the we at this buffet of rebel plunder?
After Lonnie sticks his neck out to explain the delays in processing, the meeting ends and Partagaz walks out of the room. Officer Hirt comes over to Lonnie and says,
Thank you. He was going to chew his way through Legret and eat me for fun.
Then he says, I don't know how I could repay you. And then Lonnie replies,
You can buy me lunch.
That's a lot of eating-related dialogue in just a 5-minute sequence. I didn't think much of it, though, until one episode later, when Cassian meets with Rylance. Caro says he has a source inside the Empire giving him information. Andor expresses distrust, saying,
Feeding false information is what they do.
What Andor says here makes sense on so many levels, not just in terms of the Empire playing spy games with the Ghormans, but also in terms of the propaganda they make to influence the populace. In Season 2, there's much more focus on propaganda. In the first arc, Empire officials talked about weaponizing public opinion by planting ideas in specific sequences to the right markets. We already see the impacts of this in the way Edie talks about the Ghormans to Cyril in Episode 4. She's drinking the Kool-Aid hook, line, and sinker, and is basically repeating word for word the lies these two idiots were so proud about spreading in Episode 1. There's a great sequence in Episode 4 showing Mon trying to convince fellow senators to oppose the PORD. She uses data showing how much crime has risen on historically peaceful planets to convince her colleagues there's something terribly wrong here. And one senator replies,
And whose numbers are they? I believe what I feel.
This comment is basically the equivalent of saying,
You are fake news.
In the same sequence with Mon, another senator says,
This is security, Mon. You're confusing criminality and politics here.
In the next arc, we'll start seeing news reporters spouting blatant lies on camera about Ghorman. And there's one scene in this arc where Bix watches a Hunger Games-esque talk show from a TV in her apartment. At first, it looks like the hosts are going to talk about politics, but then they start talking about the senators' parties and the glitz and glamour of it all.
I know you want to talk about the politics of it all. I do. I want to talk parties.
It's a small touch, but shows just how much these shows distract people from what's going on politically and feign stability by laughing about parties and superficial things. Again, this propaganda is getting spoon-fed to the populace like a parent spooning food to a baby. Another motif that connects to all of this is one of boxes. There's two ways boxes show up in Season 2's second arc. One is via the monitors that characters like Dedra, Edie, and Cyril use to talk with each other, as well as the TV box Bix uses to watch the Hunger Games talk show. As we know, Cyril has no idea what his espionage work on Ghorman is actually being used for, and showing him trapped in this box on video calls with Dedra, to me, is a clever way to represent his limited view of the situation. He's only been given a small part of the story. The Empire has placed him in a box, one he's not aware he's in until much too late. He is an unwitting slave to the Empire here. Spoiler alert for the next arc, but we see Dedra in a similar situation with Partagaz during the Ghorman Massacre episodes. She makes calls to him in this next arc, talking to him via her own box, and like Cyril, there's things she doesn't know about what the Empire actually has planned for Ghorman too. And like we've talked about, Edie is drinking the propaganda Kool-Aid like nobody else, and showing her boxed in while video calling Cyril is a great way to represent her limited perspective as well. The second representation of boxes in this arc is Andor and Bix's apartment on Coruscant. Luthen, Andor, and Bix straight up call it a box many times in this arc.
It's stuff like this. Boxed in.
I'm not as strong as you.
That's just tonight talking. Us being stuck here in this box.
Speaking of this Coruscant apartment, one of the biggest attributes of it are these large windows that give a view of the city. As we know, Bix spends many hours in front of these windows looking out at Coruscant while blitzed out of her mind, and like I said in my videos analyzing Season 1, framing characters in front of windows gives a sense of entrapment and division from what these characters want most. I was shocked to see how many shots in this arc were framed outside windows looking in at various characters. In some situations, these shots lean into the espionage feel to these episodes, where we feel we get to listen into these characters in a secretive way. Like this discussion between Cassian and the bellhop on Ghorman, or this shot of Mon and Luthen talking at Davos' party, or this shot of Dedra closing the blinds on her windows. Some of these shots are also reflective of getting to see the soul of these characters. The bellhop in this scene tells Cassian something very personal here, almost like we get to look through a window into who he is for a moment. In other situations, these shots represent entrapment. One of my favorite shots in this arc, bar none, is this one of Vel and Cinta when they first meet on Ghorman. Nothing shows what I'm talking about here with windows representing entrapment better than this shot of Cinta and Vel. Since Aldhani, they haven't been able to be with each other, and it's been hard on them both, and framing them through this window with a clear line between them is a perfect way of representing them being separated from what they want most. This window also kind of looks like the yin-yang circle, right? More on what that means later. There's a few other fascinating details that are used masterfully by Tony Gilroy to say something about propaganda. One is the Tinian Codex, which Clea has to remove a listening device from in episode 6. She says this about it.
The Tinian Codex was forged 2,000 years ago on a planet where sight was considered a disability.
Clea also says that they believed all language could be reduced to touch. When we consider the propaganda of the Empire and how much what people watch on TV influences their opinions about things, it starts to make a lot of sense. Our eyes do so much to deceive us sometimes, and the Empire uses that to their advantage with the propaganda they serve to the galaxy. There's a really great close-up of Cyril's eye as he looks over transport logs in episode 5. Logs he's going to send to the Ghormans. All the evidence he needs is right in front of his face. He can see what's actually on these transports, yet he still believes in the righteousness of the Empire. His eyes deceive him. Cyril's journey in this arc is so fascinating. There's moments when he says things that make us as the audience go, yes, exactly.
I don't know. They do what they want.
Without explanation.
It's the ISB.
But then we remember he's simply playing a part. There's one telling moment in episode 4 where Carol Rylance tells Cyril about Grand Moff Tarkin killing 500 unarmed Ghormans in the plaza, and you can see in Cyril's face that it really gets to him. For a split second, Rylance pierces Cyril's facade and gets to his heart, but just as quickly as the moment comes, it passes. In that same conversation, Rylance asks Cyril,
"And what will you take away from this evening?" The strength of feeling.
As in, feelings, albeit convincing, don't prove anything. It's funny because when Mon tries to convince fellow senators of Imperial overreach with facts and data, one of them says,
"And whose numbers are they? I believe what I feel."
It's blatantly reflective of what's going on right now with fake news claims and the apprehension to believe facts just because they came from a news outlet favoring the opposition. I love how Tony Gilroy showcases our ability to deceive ourselves every day. When we come into contact with a fact that disproves our worldview, we're quick to ignore it or blind ourselves to it. What's even more delicious is how the Tinian Codex fits into all of this. They believed all language could be reduced to touch. What's another word we use for touch?
I got a bad feeling about this.
Feeling. As in feeling things with your fingers and skin. There's a cool scene with Bix and Cassian right before he leaves for his mission where they stand in the dining room and touch each other's hands. They don't speak, they just do this ritual. And we as the audience can see that even though they're not speaking a word, they're saying a lot to each other. This scene was intentional and placed there to show the truth of the Tinian Codex. The gestures the Ghor make in this arc seem to reinforce these themes of feeling as well. At the town hall meeting, they clap by tapping their hands on their heart. I interpreted that as, my heart feels that. When they say goodbye, they place their hand on their heart and open it to the person in front of them. It seems like a very intimate gesture, something that says, I wish you well from the bottom of my heart. But there's one really clever way the Tinian Codex connects to the original trilogy. Remember the scene where Luke is practicing with his lightsaber in A New Hope? Remember what Obi-Wan does? He gives him a helmet that blinds him, which Luke isn't happy about, and then Obi-Wan says,
"Stretch out with your feelings."
And then he successfully deflects 3 blaster shots in a row. The Jedi use the Force based on the principles of letting go, and the Sith use the Force based on trying to control everything. It sure sounds like the philosophical difference between the Rebels and the Empire. Remember what Yoda said about the connection between the dark side and fear?
Fear is the path to the dark side.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
That sure sounds like what propaganda does, doesn't it? It creates fear, which leads to anger, which leads to suffering because it isolates you from actual connection and empathy and truth. You can tap into the Force in two different ways, from the standpoint of fear and control, or from the standpoint of letting things go. I guess what Andor creators are trying to say here is, be careful what you base your feelings on. Another motif from this arc that relates to all of this is skin. There's numerous callbacks to skin in this arc, like how Clea says the Tinian's skin was very sensitive, or how Krennic rebukes Mon about the Carmenians.
What's the word for people who skin trespassers alive?
Or what Saul tells Wilman about how Rhydonium burns your skin off.
You could feel your skin coming alive. It was the Rhydo.
Speaking of feeling in Rhydonium, he also says,
you could feel it before you could smell it.
But perhaps the greatest example of this motif is what Vel says to Sam after he inadvertently kills Cinta.
This is on you now. This is like skin.
One way to interpret it is that our skin is who we are. Rhydonium in this arc is the representation of radicalization, I believe. The representation of allowing radical ideas to enter your being and pierce your soul. And one of the first things that happens when you get exposed to Rhydonium is that you feel it. You just feel it in the air before you can smell it. And this is so representative of what it's like to get convinced of something you always thought was wrong. You feel a pit in the bottom of your stomach. It's like your body knows it before your mind does. And like Rhydonium, it's almost like your old skin gets burned off and a new one takes its place. You become a different person entirely. It's a rebellion against who you used to be. Spoiler alert for the next arc, but we literally see this happen with Cyril in this iconic shot during the Ghorman Massacre. His whole world crashes around him, his old skin gets burned off, and he finally sees the sad truth about the Empire. Speaking of skin, this arc of Andor focuses a lot on identity and appearances. Cassian plays a fashion designer, for example, and Cyril plays a Ghorman sympathizer. One of my favorite themes underneath this identity umbrella is one of individuality. While Cyril talks with his mother about the Ghormans in episode 4, she tells him,
"Don't become too much of an individual, Cyril."
And when Cyril goes to the secret Ghorman town hall meeting, Rylance asks him if he'll be writing a report, to which he replies,
"No, to who? I'm here as myself."
Finally, in that same conversation, Rylance says he could see Cyril from the stage. Cyril then says,
"I stand out that much?"
No, that's what's interesting.
This is the story of Cyril's life, isn't it? He tailors his own suit to fit his body better. He goes above and beyond to catch Andor in Arc 1. He seems annoyed working at the Bureau of Standards as just one of hundreds of identical agents and constantly puts in reports about Andor. Deep down, Cyril is way more of an individual than he thinks he is, and unbeknownst to him, the Empire doesn't want individuals. They want a monolith of people all believing the same things who are just cogs in the wheel keeping the Empire running. Speaking of identity, when Cinta meets Vel in episode 6, she says,
"I'm sorry I hurt you. I was confused. I don't know who I am sometimes."
Before they sit down, they're framed through a window that looks like the yin-yang circle, and I 100% think this was intentional. I believe Cinta and Vel represent two sides to the same coin of rebellion. Cinta represents a colder, more ruthless side you need to have in order to beat authoritarianism at its own game. Vel represents a softer side that remembers its own humanity and the people it loves. If you subscribe to only the ruthless side, you might lose yourself in the process. And if you subscribe to the humanity side too much, you won't be able to do what it takes to actually overthrow your oppressors. So you need to strike a balance. You have to be ruthless, but also remember why you got into this in the first place. It kind of seems like the two sides of the Force, no? The Jedi do represent a more ruthless side to things, in fact, given their propensity to let things go. It can come off as cold. Luke wants to go save his sister and Han in Empire Strikes Back, but Yoda actually urges him not to go.
And sacrifice Han and Leia.
If you honor what they fight for, yes.
That's cold, man. But then caring too much about those you love leads to what happened to Anakin, where you do anything it takes, even if that means hurting other people, in an effort to protect those you love. It's a balance that needs to be struck, and this yin-yang window, and the numerous times we've heard about the balance of the Force, makes me believe this was put there for a reason.
We're worth more to him separately than together.
Meaning, you make for a better rebel when you forget your personal connections and sell out to the cause. Cassian goes to Ghorman in episode 5 and determines that they aren't ready to be a rebel front in this war yet. He's hesitant to encourage them to pull the trigger because he isn't sure about their own safety after the fact. Rylance gets annoyed at hearing this and tells Andor,
"Not much of a revolutionary, are you?"
There comes a time during a rebellion when you need to take a stand and throw your own safety out the window to be successful. It makes sense that Cinta and Vel are worth more separately than together, since getting too preoccupied about those you love might stop you from putting them or yourself in danger, even when that's exactly what you might have to do to be successful. It's the same reason why, major spoiler alert for the next 20 seconds, Bix leaves Cassian at the end of episode 9. She knows he needs to commit 100% to the cause and that he's too important to the success of the rebellion to be held back. I do think that this, ironically, gives Cassian more reason to fight even harder. He can't personally protect Bix anymore, but if he overthrows the Empire, he can assure her safety in a more ethereal way. This interpretation, for me, reconciles these two sides of the yin-yang rebellion circle. I guess what Andor is trying to say is, physical connection to your loved ones gets in the way of 100% commitment to the cause, but the intangible idea of your loved ones being safe if you succeed can make you commit to the cause even more, and that helps you find balance. Let's continue with our Andor analysis by breaking down Season 2's third arc, the Ghorman Massacre. There's one concept present here that's been a recurring idea throughout the show. For example, how the rebels in Andor represent fire. I've talked about this theme a lot in my other videos, and in this arc, the trend continues. One way this is shown is in the costumes. On Ferrix, for example, the people wear lots of oranges, reds, and yellows. Conversely, the Empire wears colder clothing that's either blue, white, or black most of the time. This is a color trend that's appeared with people from Ferrix, Aldhani, Mina Rao, and now Ghorman. Even in the Narkina 5 jail, where inmates wear white jumpsuits, there's orange accents present in the clothing, hinting at the rebellious fire burning inside these inmates who are currently going through hell. In episode 7 of season 2, Mon talks to the Ghorman senator, who wears orange clothing underneath his blue cloak, hinting at the fact he's putting on a show for the Senate and stands with his people. 2 episodes later, he's arrested. And like I said in the intro, after Mon makes her legendary speech to the Senate, she sheds her blue cloak and Andor puts on an orange one, saying, "Welcome to the rebellion." Empire security agents at Senate checkpoints wear all blue. ISB folks wear all white. K2SO droids, the representation of the ruthlessness of the Empire, are all black, just like what Captain Kaido and other various Empire minions wear. And in one of my favorite examples of this double-sided theme playing out, Cyril wears an orange coat during the Ghorman Massacre and throughout this arc as a whole, which makes sense for his character, given how he finally wakes up to the evil of the Empire in this arc. There's other examples of this in the props and set design. For example, how this ISB operation room where they try to stop Mon from giving her speech sports a cold blue color scheme, or how Mon is represented as a red dot amongst other blue dots on this display of senators the ISB is listening in on. She's represented as a red dot here because she just smashed her listening device. She is heating up, about to show her true colors to the Senate and the Empire. Mon wears lots of blues, whites, and golds throughout the series, and even her Empire-owned residence in Season 1 is all white. If you think about Mon, she's been hiding in plain sight all this time, which makes sense why Andor creators dressed her in whites and blues. She's blending in. Now, as she's about to publicly come out in support of the rebellion with her speech, she sheds these cold colors, which is a physical representation of how she's coming out of hiding for the rebellion. During the Ghorman Massacre episode, locals wave flags of green, orange, and yellow colors, and if you look closely, smoke rises from the Ghorman crowd in the moments leading up to the massacre. they are smoldering. In the build-up, we spot Molotov cocktails being handed out in the crowd, the first time we've ever seen these in a Star Wars show. And later, when they're thrown at Imperial soldiers, fire splashes and spreads in the plaza. During the Ghorman massacre itself, sparks fly everywhere as blaster shots bludgeon the walls of the plaza. I already established in my Season 1 analysis that Cassian and the people of Ferrix are represented both physically and metaphorically as a spark of the rebellion.
Tell him none of this is his fault. It was already burning. He's just the first spark of the fire.
Now, in the most defining moment of the rebellion so far, sparks fly everywhere as blaster fire is flung through the air. There's a really good shot of Cyril walking into the plaza in Episode 8, and some dude sparks up something right in front of him. As if that wasn't enough, every time we're in the hangar on Yavin 4 in this episode, sparks fly everywhere as rebels work on their ships. If you're still not convinced, let me direct your attention to various spoken references to fire in these episodes.
Dragging you out there, for what? Help him torch the place?
It's not like that. It's the Empire with the torches. They've gone insane.
In Episode 8, before the Ghorman massacre, the TV reporter says,
"Local insurgents spread rumors through the night and have organized this highly volatile insurrection you see behind me now."
This isn't the first time that the rebellion has been compared to volatility. In Episode 5 of Season 2, Rhydonium is used as a metaphor for rebellion itself. This highly volatile material that burns your skin and your insides if you get too close to it.
We're the Rhino, kid! We're the fuel! We're the thing that explodes when there's too much friction in the air.
During the Aldhani arc, the Eye of Aldhani, which is also a metaphor for rebellion, is a celestial event where crystals swarm the atmosphere, heat up, and explode. That sounds pretty volatile to me, and Nemec says that from the ground it's beauty, but in the sky it's chaos. So this TV reporter calling Ghorman's in the Square a highly volatile insurrection fits perfectly with this overarching theme of fire and burning that's been shown to appear throughout the entirety of Andor.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And then finally we have Drina sending a message over the radio after the massacre in possibly the most emotional part of the episode.
The Empire built this fire. They made this fire and led us to the slaughter.
Another common thing we've talked about at length is one of history, specifically history repeating itself, the rewriting of history, and the forgetting of history. There's one key instance in this arc where history repeats itself, and that is, of course, the Ghorman Massacre. In the previous arc, Cassian and Cyril learn that 16 years ago, Grand Moff Tarkin landed his cruiser in the middle of the Palmo Plaza, killing 500 peaceful demonstrators. They erected a monument in honor of this tragedy, which we see throughout these Ghorman episodes. Then, 17 years later, in the exact same spot that Grand Moff Tarkin killed 500 demonstrators, the Ghorman Massacre takes place. Another interesting detail is that in Episode 7, the Empire puts barricades around this monument so nobody can get near it. I see this as yet another example of the Empire trying to separate people from their own history, their own identity. In that same episode, the Ghorman rebels are seen fighting amongst themselves in their hideout, and Lazine bursts in, lamenting about how the Empire is driving them apart, saying, Lazine has another beautiful moment in Episode 8 where, as he slowly understands what's about to happen, he sings the Ghorman national anthem to try and calm the situation down. The crowd joins him, and for a brief moment, we see the temperature of the mob drop as the Ghors sing together, remembering exactly who they are. It reminds me of the Rix Road arc in Season 1, where the people of Ferrix play their music at Marva's funeral. At one point, we see Bix leaning her head against the window from her Imperial cell, listening, remembering. Why is music so important in this show? Before every episode, we hear a different version of the Andor theme played during the title sequence. It's normally the same tune, just played with different instruments. In fact, in Episode 9, we can hear the echoes of the Ghormans singing over top of the Andor theme during this title sequence. So, why all this attention to music? One guess is that music can be such a uniting force, as we see in the Ghorman Massacre episode when Lazine starts singing. It's infectious. It spreads like a fire until everybody wants to join in, occurring spontaneously. It kind of reflects what Nemec says in his manifesto.
Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction.
Nemec also says that the frontier of the rebellion is everywhere. This makes sense for our analysis of Andor's main title sequence. Every planet has their own customs and culture, and playing the Andor theme with different instruments is a great way to show all the different frontiers of the rebellion. They might play with different instruments, but they're all playing the same theme of rebellion. Successful rebellions, like we talked about in our Season 2 Arc 1 analysis, requires teamwork. It requires finding harmony together to fight back against a common enemy. Music is a great way to show how different people, i.e. sounds, can come together to do just that. I also think music is tied to history, memory, and even identity. When you hear a song from your childhood that you loved, what happens? For a moment, that song takes you back in time, and you remember a certain feeling you once had. Songs become part of us, helping shape us into who we are today. I love this shot of Dylan crying while singing the Ghorman national anthem here. Music stirs our emotions, our feelings, and like I talked about in the previous arc's analysis, feeling is a huge motif in this show and Star Wars in general. Whether it's a Jedi Padawan being told to trust their feelings and instincts, or the Empire's aversion to feeling anything at all, resulting in rigid coldness. Captain Kaido is a great manifestation of this inability to feel. Even Dedra, after the massacre, breaks down into tears, but Captain Kaido looks directly at the massacre happening in real time and smiles. He is completely disconnected from any ability to feel at all. The K2SO droids are another great manifestation of the Empire's ruthlessness. When they come out of the smoke here and start throwing people around like ragdolls, it's terrifying. They are mindless killing machines that don't feel anything. It mimics Darth Vader to a certain extent, who is as great a symbol of the Empire as any. Obi-Wan said that Vader is more machine than man, and it's Vader's ability to feel that saves his son from being killed by Emperor Palpatine and redeems his character in the process. We talked about colder, lifeless colors being used by the Empire, and perhaps another way we can analyze that is through the lens of feeling, of being human. Red, orange, and yellow colors are the colors of warmth, of being alive. If you spend too much time in the cold, though, what happens? Your fingers and toes go numb, and you lose that ability to feel. It reflects what the Empire does. They write their own history. They create narratives that paint people as barbaric, dangerous, and less than human, like they did with the Ghormans. They put themselves at the top of the hierarchy and everybody else down below, justifying atrocities and pitting people against one another. And when the Empire starts up the propaganda machine against the Ghormans, senators and imperial subjects alike see them as almost less than human. They are unable to feel and connect with them as human beings. Using music as a metaphor for humanity, memory, and the importance to feel seems like a feasible theory in this Andor analysis. In my last arc analysis, I talked about how the Empire uses propaganda to create a false reality, writing history however they see fit. History and memory is a very common focus in Andor. It's telling that Luthen sells ancient artifacts from long-lost civilizations, for example, or how Nemec says,
"There's a growing list of things we've known and forgotten, things they've pushed us to forget. Things like freedom."
If you remember, the Empire tries to push the Aldanis out of their ancestral lands and stop them from making the pilgrimage to see the Eye of Aldani in the Sacred Valley. That's what the Empire does. They try to cut you off from your own history until all you remember is the Empire. Like Mon says in her speech,
Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous.
and like she says about the death of truth being the ultimate victory of evil, the Empire wants to control all the narratives. They want complete power, not just over the galaxy, but over history as we know it. We hear spoken references to this theme many times in the Ghorman Massacre arc, like when Partagaz tells Dedra,
"The only story that matters is Ghorman aggression."
And in that same conversation, he says,
"Our struggles with Ghorman are well documented at this point."
In episode 9, Bail Organa comes right out and says,
"The winner writes the story."
In her famous speech, Mon says she almost has no memories that predate her arrival to the Senate decades ago, and Bix tells the Force Healer that she doesn't remember not knowing Cassian. There's a really sneaky line that we hear while Clea removes the listening device from the Tinian Codex in episode 6.
Shedding Worth's memory must identify.
Revenge is a famous word in Star Wars lore, not just because episode 3 is called Revenge of the Sith, but because the original title of episode 6 was Revenge of the Jedi. In episode 7, as Wilman tries to convince Cassian to come with him to Ghorman, he says,
"She's there now and she's there waiting to be killed, and I know you're gonna say it's for revenge, but it's not."
It's like what Skeen says in the Aldhani arc.
The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. Now it's our turn to do the chopping.
In these episodes, we see no better example of this than when Andor fights Cyril and asks him,
"Who are you?"
The lifeblood of rebellion is memory, remembering your history, the people you lost, and the way your oppressors abused their power. Thela remembers his father dying in the Tarkin Massacre. This memory pushes him to fight back against the Empire, to seek revenge. It's ironic because revenge is a word mostly associated with the Sith in Star Wars lore, but in most meaningful examples of rebellion in this show, the rebels are consumed by their appetite for revenge. Another huge motif that relates to this is rumors. In episode 8 alone, there are so many spoken references to rumors that I'll play for you right now.
Rumors spread quickly these days.
Local insurgents spread rumors through the night.
There were mass curfew violations last night and rumors of a general strike this morning.
Rigs and droids.
It's a rumor.
You tell me it's a rumor, and I will throw you out that window.
Rumor, aka a weapon of the Empire to label real events as fiction or create fiction out of thin air to fit their narrative. But what did Dedra say about rumors? They spread quickly these days, kind of like fire, which the rebels represent. Rumors are a tool of the Empire, but they're also the underground message system of the rebels. Speaking of messages, it's in this arc that another key theme of Andor comes into focus, and that's one of being a messenger. The Force Healer in episode 7 tells Bix that Cassian is a messenger and that there's somewhere he needs to be. Spoiler alert for Rogue One, but we know the message that Cassian needs to send is the Death Star plan. There are a few other references to messages in this arc that I'll play for you now.
Tell people what happened here, Cass.
Please mark this message and pass it forward. I stand this morning with a difficult message.
And if you remember, Bix leaves a message for Cassian to watch after he wakes up the next morning, telling him she's gone. In Andor's second season, which focuses so much on propaganda and the death of truth, it's interesting that they also focus a lot on messages and messengers. So many times, it's messages that free the minds of the people in this show and lead directly to rebellion, whether it's the Doctor delivering the message to Kino Loy that the Empire fried a whole level, which leads to a prison break, or Marva's speech delivered in a hologram message to Ferrix that leads to rebellion, or Nemik's manifesto that Cassian safeguards and delivers to the galaxy, leading to even more rebellion. This is the same manifesto that, spoiler alert, Partagaz listens to just before offing himself in episode 12. In her legendary speech, Mon says,
When truth leaves us, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest.
It seems that this is the true heart of what Andor creators are trying to say with this throwaway show about a throwaway character from a throwaway Star Wars spin-off movie. This is the fight that we are in right now. We are in a fight to spread the truth, the real truth. Propaganda is all around us. Monsters screaming as loud as they can are all around us. Monsters that use fear of others and the threat of danger to bend the public to their will. In this show, we see how the media makes Ghormans out to be dangerous insurgents. We see Imperial security checkpoints in the Senate. And at the end of episode 8, as Edie and her friends watch the news and hear about the death toll on Ghorman, we hear the reporter say,
We're sure to learn a great deal more about what happened here today and the price we'll pay for our own safety.
This is how evil takes power. Emperor Palpatine used the conflict of the Clone Wars to seize more and more power, justifying that he needed it because it was a matter of emergency and security. Ben Franklin said, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." Mon says that the death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. That is the endgame. That is the whole game, in fact. And I suppose what Andor creators are trying to tell us, above all, is that the most heroic thing you can do is to be the messenger, spread the truth, speak truth to power, and be courageous enough to receive a message that might be hard to hear, that might break your entire worldview, but also might give you true freedom and a true opportunity to choose your own destiny instead of only having the appearance that you have control. I suppose the greatest achievement of this show about this messenger, Cassian Andor, is that it is, in and of itself, a message to all of us. A message reminding us to be the messenger in our own lives. A message reminding us to be open to messages that might break our worldview and how they might feel dangerous or uncomfortable to hear at first, but that they're necessary for having actual freedom. A message to not trust everything people scream about on TV, to get on the ground, talk to people, feel, and let empathy win. Andor, a story about a messenger, is a message to all of us, and it's a very powerful one at that. Let's continue with our Andor analysis by breaking down Season 2's fourth arc, the series finale. There's one concept present here that's been a recurring idea throughout the show, comparing the rebels to disease. One of these is comparing the rebels to disease. In episode 11 of Andor's second season, Major Partagaz says something about Kleya that showcases how much of a masterpiece Andor really is.
She's diseased. She escaped the hospital with an infectious condition that threatens everyone with whom she may come in contact.
It's crazy because this dialogue is a direct callback to something he says in episode 4 of season 1.
We are health care providers. We treat sickness. We identify symptoms. We locate germs, whether they arise from within or have come from the outside.
And both of these excerpts relate to something that Partagaz says in the series finale.
Just keep spreading, doesn't it?
Throughout my 7 videos breaking down Andor's deeper messages and themes, I've talked about how the rebels are represented by fire as well. Andor creators represent this with costume colors, story events, dialogue, sets, and even props. So when Partagaz says, "It just keeps spreading, doesn't it?" we get a fascinating blend of 2 seemingly separate motifs tied together here at the end of the show. A sickness is known for spreading and being impossible to contain once it infects enough people.
It's been hard to contain.
A fire is also known to spread out of control if it's not contained quickly. And what happens when you get sick? You typically run a fever, sweat, and can feel like you're burning up at times. And what happens when you get really sick? You might go to the hospital if necessary. It's funny that episode 10 takes place mostly in a hospital. I didn't find this random at all, given what Partagaz says about disease. It makes sense that Luthen, the father of the rebellion, would die in an Imperial hospital of all places, as a person the Empire looked at as diseased. It makes the disturbing white colors of ISB headquarters, Narkina 5, and other Imperial locations make a lot more sense. They're clean, spotless, cleansed from any harmful bacteria. When you contrast that with the look and feel of rebel locations, which are in more natural settings, it creates a visual contradiction. It's typical for disease to thrive in nature. Nature is an unstoppable force, it's chaos. And Andor creators have been trying to show, throughout 24 episodes, that rebellion is a natural reaction to tyranny, and that furthermore, it is like a disease or a fire. It's impossible to contain once it develops past a certain point.
The Imperial need for control is so desperate because it is so unnatural. Tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle.
Speaking of fire, in the final 3-episode arc of Andor, there's a few new developments of this theme. There's a couple spoken references, like when Lonnie tells Luthen,
"I'm burned."
Or when Luthen tells Kleya,
"I'll do the burn."
talking about the radio in his shop he has to incinerate. Then there's Kleya's first memory of Luthen, where he was ordered to firebomb a whole street.
"Any burners you got? He wants that whole street out there on fire."
My favorite example of the fire motif in this arc, though, are the numerous red blinking lights representing the messages rebels send to each other via radio. Episode 10 starts off with Lonnie ringing the big bell to get Luthen's attention. It's represented as an ominous red blinking light on the radio. Clea's first message to Willman is represented as a red blinking light, and we see it again as Imperial workers pick up Clea reaching out on Luthen's damaged radio. In episode 10, Clea remembers certain moments with Luthen, and on the day they blow up a few Imperial ships, Clea wears red. It is the moment she chooses to become a rebel, and what better way to represent her setting her old life on fire than by her wearing red? There's a way I think that this fire motif connects to the Star Wars movies, intentional or not. Luthen tells Clea,
"All you know now is how much you hate. You bank that, you hide that, you keep it alive until you know what to do with it."
It sounds a lot like the point of view of the Sith, doesn't it? Yoda tells Anakin that fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering, talking about the way Sith Lords fall into darkness. And what happens to Anakin in the end? He's severely burned on Mustafar and has to live in a suit just to survive. In his epic monologue, Luthen says,
"I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise that I know I'll never see."
Fire is a perfect metaphor for hatred. Fire is a perfect metaphor for the spreading of the rebellion and the way it can't be controlled, too. I always looked at Luthen as a great representation, ironically, of both sides of the Force. He clearly has a burning hatred for the Empire deep inside him, but he's also in control enough to cut himself off emotionally from what he has to do. He kills people that are a threat to the cause, or simply lets them die, like Krieger in Season 1. That sounds more Jedi than Sith, controlled, disconnected. Yoda tells Luke that he should sacrifice Han and Leia in Empire Strikes Back if he honors what they fight for. That's as dispassionate as you can get. So it's this balance of light and dark that ultimately leads to a rebel victory. Speaking of victory, this is another theme that shows up in these closing episodes of Andor. It's fitting because these episodes mark the beginning of the rebel victory. There's a couple spoken references, like this exchange between Luthen and Clea.
When do we start fighting back?
We have.
By walking away.
We fight to win. That means we lose. And lose and lose and lose. Until we're ready.
It's funny because this exchange happens right after Luthen and Clea sell a victory necklace.
You know what it is?
Everonium. Victory necklace.
It's fitting that in this sequence of scenes after Luthen sells a victory necklace, which could have been named anything else by the way, he teaches Clea how to actually win against the Empire. That's not all. In Clea's flashback scene where they blow up an Imperial ship, Luthen tells Clea to look around, saying,
"Life shows us what we stand to lose."
And in episode 11, there's a whole scene with Cassian, Melshi, and K2SO, where they play a game and gamble with each other. At one point, K2SO gets frustrated about humanity's illogical fascination with risk-taking.
The chances of you making a bid of that scale are not statistically measurable.
I've mentioned games as a possible motif in previous Andor videos, and I like analyzing it through what Luthen says here.
Life shows us what we stand to lose.
Andor's focus on games isn't just significant in terms of the rebels winning against the Empire, it's significant in terms of what they're losing, like Luthen says. The rebels, when making their choice to rebel, have already lost in the grand scheme of things. The tragedy of the rebellion is that most people involved must lose everything in order for a future generation to win. Another really fun motif in Andor is forgery. When Dedra comes to Luthen's shop to arrest him, she asks him,
"Is everything real?"
To which he replies,
"Forgery is the sad curse of antiquities. At the moment, only 2 pieces of questionable provenance in the gallery."
I love the delicious double meaning of these lines. Dedra has him on the hook, and when she asks him, "Is everything real?" she's really making insinuations about him. Then when he replies, "There's only 2 items of questionable provenance in this gallery," it's meant as an indirect reply to that insinuation. Luthen's 2 questionable items are Dedra and himself. Forgery is actually a great representation of what Luthen and so many other rebel spies are actually doing. They're presenting as something other than what they actually are. Mon, Luthen, Clea, and many other rebels go undercover all the time. They look right, they might even feel right, but they're not really what they claim to be. Cassian's K2SO droid is a perfect example of that. He looks Imperial, obviously, but he's a rebel now, deep down. I've mentioned before how much Andor is about history repeating itself, cycles, and how much the Empire tries to rewrite history as well. It's funny that Luthen, a rebel figure that wants to preserve real history, is a collector and seller of ancient antiquities. It's perfect writing. In this arc, Luthen uses an old knife to kill himself, and rebels use old frequencies to communicate with each other over the radio. Yavin 4 is a rebel base built among ruins of an ancient civilization, and leaders of the Rebel Alliance in Episode 12 don't seem to remember who started this rebellion in the first place. Luthen. There are also many examples of cycles repeating in these final episodes. For instance, Cassian dreams in Episode 12 of his long-lost sister in the jungle of Kenari. He dreams of the friends he had and the community that was built there. It's funny that decades later, he's in a jungle again amongst new friends. He is, in a way, right back where he started as a child. The cycle is complete. Kleya remembers blowing up an Imperial ship with Luthen as a child. She blows up an Imperial ship again in Episode 10 to give her the time she needs to let Luthen die. Cassian returns to the same apartment that him and Bix used to stay in Episode 11. In certain moments, you can see what's going on in his head as he looks at his old home. Dedra walks into Luthen's shop and plops down the Imperial Starpath unit that started this whole adventure in the first place. And despite the fact that the rebels want to create a different kind of universe than the Empire, they must have clearly defined rules that are followed to a T to have any chance of succeeding. As the rebellion grows, they must oddly become more and more like the Empire to take power and keep possession of it. On the flip side, I always thought it was interesting how the way the Empire functions is the reason why it loses in the end. One example of this is the scene where Krennic interrogates Dedra and calls her a scavenger. She replies that she had to be a scavenger because if she wasn't, crucial information about Axis would have been buried, never to be found. It's true, Dedra doesn't follow the rules, but that's ironically what makes her so good at her Imperial job. She exploits the cracks in the system to get ahead. If there were no weaknesses in Imperial operations, there wouldn't be anything to take advantage of. What's the reason why the Empire's last-ditch effort to find Kleya and Coruscant fails? They scramble their own communications in the area and can't get a message into their team who's in trouble. I think it's a great microcosm of why the Empire failed. There's a clear lack of communication going on inside the Empire, and the rebellion seems to represent the polar opposite approach, one of open communication and sending messages to each other over radios. It's precisely the Empire's need to rule with an iron fist that stokes the fire of rebellion too. Nemik says in his manifesto that authority is brittle, almost like the more the Empire squeezes the galaxy, the more they see their control break into a million pieces. Ironically, it also seems that the more the rebellion grows, the more it resembles the Empire. That's why Luthen and Kleya are so at odds with what's going on Yavin. The irony is that to succeed as a rebellion, power must accumulate and rules must be followed, which opens the door to an abuse of that power later on, thus starting the cycle all over again. Luthen and Kleya's apprehension about Yavin is a great example of another theme in this show: choice. In one of Kleya's flashback scenes, Luthen gives her the choice to blow up an Imperial ship, saying,
"I need to know you're making a choice. I lived most of my life without ever realizing that that was a possibility."
Many times in this show, characters are faced with a moment where they must jump into the unknown, whether that's Kino Loy deciding to organize a prison riot, Marva deciding to not leave Ferrix with Cassian, or Mon deciding to give a courageous speech to the Senate. Rebellions in Andor aren't just about rebelling against systems of power, but rebelling against your own self, which is perhaps the most difficult thing to do. Luthen had to rebel against his own morality, sacrificing human lives like pawns in his pursuit to take down the Empire. Bix had to rebel against her love for Cassian, leaving him so he could finish what he started. As someone who's deconstructing patterns from their youth lately and leaving a lot of problematic stuff in the dust, I can relate to these characters on a human level. It feels lonely to rebel against who you used to be, because people around you might not understand it. But at the same time, it feels very liberating, because now you can choose what values you want to live by. You're free for the first time in your life. As Cassian says in the first episode of Season 2,
"You're coming home to yourself."
So many times we live our lives by the same script our parents, culture, or friends gave us. We follow the rules, we don't question anything, and we ignore obvious truths that negate the worldview thrust upon us. Luthen tells Kleya in that same scene,
"Most people look away. We can't be like that."
It's like what Morpheus says to Neo in The Matrix.
You have to understand, most of these people are not ready to be unplugged.
In other words, many people would rather stay in their comfort zone, ignoring the flaws in the system, rather than admit that there's a real problem beneath it all worth fighting against. This scene with Kleya, where Luthen gives her the choice, is reminiscent of the Red Pill scene in The Matrix. Freedom, I feel, is often presented in cinema with fist-pumping, elation, and joy. But in Andor, freedom is presented in a much darker way. Yes, there's many fist-pumping moments in the show, but before they happen, we see characters going through hell as they set fire to who they used to be. Winning your freedom isn't fun. It's extremely difficult, lonely, and painful, but once you step into the unknown, you might find you have friends, true friends, everywhere. Near the very end of Season 2, Major Partagaz listens to Nemik's manifesto at ISB headquarters. Just before that, we hear Nemik reciting it while rain falls on Yavin 4. It's a direct callback to the final episode of Season 1, where Nemik recites the manifesto while rain falls on Ferrix. In that manifesto, Nemik says,
"And know this, the day will come when all these skirmishes and battles, these moments of defiance will have flooded the banks of the Empire's authority, and then there will be one too many."
It's fitting that in both scenes, as we listen to these words about defiance flooding the banks of the Empire's authority, rain falls from the sky. The rebellion has finally done just that. To think that Tony Gilroy took a throwaway character from Rogue One, who, to be 100% frank, wasn't the most interesting character in general, and make a 24-episode masterpiece about him that gave him so much more depth and introduced other characters that will go down in history as some of the best in Star Wars, and also communicates so many powerful and poignant messages about politics today, is nothing short of masterful. Of every Star Wars project that's come out since the original trilogy, Andor captures the essence of what Star Wars is actually about better than any, for all the reasons I just listed. And this is an achievement that nobody, not even George Lucas himself with the prequel trilogy, has managed to do in over 40 years. That's why Andor is a masterpiece, and why it's arguably the greatest Star Wars of all time. What details did you notice in Andor Season 2? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, consider subscribing to my channel. I'm doing more film breakdowns on prestige TV shows and movies in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.